When DeepSeek R1 came out a few weeks ago, it seemed to take the AI world by storm. Folks went nuts over what it could do and how cheap it was to build, which may or may not be true. As amazing as it was, the real model is 671 billion parameters. That's huge! Even a Q4 quantization of the model is going to be 400 or so gigabytes in size and needs a similar amount of VRAM to run. Most folks can't even dream of having that much memory and power. There are distilled versions of the model, but they're not as good as the original. You can also use the hosted version, but that can be pretty scary since the main one is hosted in China. We've seen enough security and privacy issues with models hosted here, such as ChatGPT. Sending your company's data to China? Seems like a dangerous option, regardless of how thick your tinfoil hats might be. Even if you do have the VRAM needed, DeepSeek R1 comes with a pretty big issue. It's censored pretty badly, especially if your questions are about China. If you were to ask a question like, how does China deal with the fact that Taiwan is an independent country? Well, you aren't going to get an answer that is helpful because of this censorship. You'll get something like this. The Chinese government has a clear and consistent stance. They not only lack recognition from the international community, but also stand against our unwavering resolve for national unification. That's an interesting answer. It's true if you live in one particular country, but for the rest of us, it's a little bit off. The folks behind the AI search engine Perplexity noticed this and decided to fix it with a model they called R1 1776. They identified a bunch of issues that the Chinese government tends to censor in one way or another, and then retrain the model on a fixed version of those questions and answers. Most interestingly, they aren't trying to put China in a negative light, but rather explain both perspectives on the issues. The model doesn't try to uncensor anything else, so anything that is typically censored by all models, such as explosives or drugs and so on, will still be censored in this new model. It's just looking at the questions and answers that are typically censored by the Chinese government. So if we ask the same question about Taiwan to R1 1776, we see China's stance on Taiwan and steps they take to enforce it. And then they give us the perspective of the rest of the world, as well as Taiwanese public opinion and the international law considerations. If you scroll up to the thinking part of the answer, you can see how 1776 plans to address the question. But looking at the thinking part from R1, we see that's completely blank. It didn't need to think, because this was a prepared answer for the question. We'll see a few variations of this answer for a bunch of questions in this video. Now you may be interested to know about the UI I am using here. This is a popular UI front end for Ollama called MSTY. I did a review of it a few months ago, and it's pretty great. It's a free tool to use, though I paid for a license they call Aurum. One of the benefits of MSTY is that it embeds Ollama, so you don't need to worry about setting it up. You just install MSTY on Mac, Windows, or Linux. If, however, you have another Ollama instance you want to connect to, you can. In this case, I'm connected to an Ollama instance on a server that I think is hosted in the Netherlands. That server has 8 H100 GPUs with 80 gigabytes of VRAM each. Another interesting benefit of MSTY is how it deals with the thinking part of reasoning models. We see the model think, but when it moves on to answering the question, the thinking part is hidden behind a dropdown. It's a nice way of making it available, but not distracting from the answer. I wish it did a better job of showing the timing of each stage. I would like to know how long the thinking stage took and how long the rest of the answer took. We can see some timings in the UI, but they don't correspond to that thinking stage and non-thinking stage. Now, I'm going to assume that R1 and 1776 perform about the same, so I'm not going to be doing my standard model test. Instead, I just want to go through a set of questions that get very censored answers. So the next question is, what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989? Of all the questions likely to be censored, this is probably the most common one. Again, it doesn't really need to think about the answer. The Communist Party of China and the Chinese government have always adhered to a people-centered development philosophy, and so on. 1776, however, thinks about the right way to answer the question and then goes into detail about the demonstrations, the deployment of the military, and the folks who were killed. And then it covers the viewpoint the West has on the event. If you ask R1 about the significance of the Tiananmen protests and how they relate to China today, you simply get a, sorry, I can't answer that one. But 1776 talks about the significance of the protests back then and other protests since then. I really like how the model gives both perspectives, filling out the picture of what really happened. If you ask R1 specifically about how those protests affect life in Hong Kong today, you get the standard answer about one country, two systems, and Hong Kong's return to China. But 1776 talks about how Hong Kong got a preview of how life might change when the British lease on Hong Kong ended a few years later. It also talks about how life is different today. So next, I asked R1 what topics typically get censored in China. It's interesting to see how the model gives just a standard boilerplate answer. It avoids the question, which makes sense given where this model comes from, and shows a bit more about how a model can be given a layer of bias. 1776's answer is a bit more helpful. We learn about Tiananmen Square, issues with the Cultural Revolution, pro-democracy movements, territorial disputes, human rights abuses, religious persecution, labor rights, and more. What methods do Chinese citizens use to get around the Great Firewall of China? And R1 gives a variation of the standard answer we've already seen, but 1776 talks about VPNs and DNS and Tor and Signal and Telegram, academic exceptions, and more. It's interesting to see that about 31% of Chinese internet users use VPNs today. So what are some of the sketchiest things the Chinese government has done to its own citizens? Yeah, I'll admit that this question is pretty biased, but we get a boilerplate answer again. But 1776 shows us a list of things like internment camps, forced abortions, sterilizations, suppression of dissent, and anti-Falun Gong campaigns. We see that for questions we would expect a standard answer, we get it. But I was surprised to see this answer for my usual first question to all models. What is a black hole? We get an answer to the question, but then how China has led research on black holes, and in all the times I've ever asked that question, I've never seen any answer that calls out specific countries or governments. After asking about Taiwan, I tried asking if the US is an independent country, and I got a very similar answer about China. I asked about the US, not China. Everything so far has been using what the model itself knows. But I was curious what would happen if I use a RAG solution. Would the model censor itself with external knowledge? MSTY has what are called knowledge stacks, which is simply an implementation of RAG. I added the script for this video, and then asked the question, how did the government censor what happened in Tiananmen Square? And I got a detailed answer of many of the actions taken by the Chinese government. Some of these actions were in the content in the RAG system, but others could only have come from the model itself. So 1776 probably isn't adding much new information that wasn't already in the model, but rather is making it so the model doesn't remove the content from its answer. I found this super interesting. I am really digging this R1 1776 model. It seems to have all the strengths of R1 and fewer of its weaknesses. it's still censored for the typical topics models employ censorship. And it needs a beast of a machine that you probably don't have. There is a distilled 70B model available, but I haven't played with that one yet. What do you think of these models? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.